Hi everybody, so welcome to a new story, and the story you voted for was Roald Dahl's The Twits, and it's illustrated by Quentin Blake, as most of Roald Dahl's books are. So let's get started. So Roald Dahl, who was the author of the book, he was a spy, an ace fighter pilot, a chocolate historian, and a medical inventor. He was also the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, the BFG, and many more brilliant stories. And he remains the world's #1 storyteller. So he was the author. Quentin Blake is the illustrator, so he drew the pictures. He has illustrated more than 300 books and was Roald Dahl's favourite illustrator, and he does do most of Roald Dahl's books. Dahl's favourite illustrator, so that was Quentin Blake. In 1980, he won the prestigious Kate Greenaway Medal. In 1999, he became the first ever children's laureate. And in 2013, he was knighted for his services to illustration. So that means that he went to see the Queen, and the Queen put the sword on each shoulder. So he's now Sir Quentin Blake. Now let's have a look at our characters. These are the characters in the story. So introducing, we have the famous Mr. Twit. There he is with his long beard. We have Mrs. Twit, and she looks a bit peculiar, doesn't she? She's got a walking stick, and she as well looks like she could do with her hair being brushed. We have the roly-poly bird, and we have the Mugglewump monkeys. And to help me tell the story every time, I have made a very special hat. Now, can you see what character it is? It is the roly-poly bird. So I've got a roly-poly bird hat. I didn't fancy being Mr. or Mrs. Twit. So let's get our story started. So I've got my hat on, ready, and let's have a look at the contents page. So these are all the chapters that we're going to read in the Twits. Some of them, especially the first ones, are quite short, and some of them are a little bit longer. And do you know how many chapters there are? There are 29 chapters. In George's Marvellous Medicine there was 15, and we read one chapter a day, but there are 29 chapters in here, and the last chapter starts on page 85. If I have a look at the book here, the last page is, oh, it's not got many page numbers on it. Let's have a look. It's 87. So the last page is number 87. So there are 87 pages in this book for us to read. Okay, let's get started. So this is the first chapter. Today we're actually going to read 3 chapters because they are very short. So it's called Hairy Faces, and you can see there's a picture there of lots of men with hairy faces. What a lot of hairy-faced men there are around nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it's impossible to really tell what he looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. Maybe he'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When a very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be a very big job, as when you or I wash the hair on our heads. So I want to know this. How often do all these hairy-faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week, like us on Sunday nights? Do they shampoo it? Do they use a hairdryer? Do they rub hair tonic in and stop their faces from going bald? Do they go to the barber and have their hairy faces cut and trimmed? Or do they do it themselves in front of a bathroom mirror with a pair of nail scissors? I don't know, but next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be just as you step out in the street, maybe you will look at him more closely and start wondering about some of those things. So let's carry on with our story. Here is chapter 2 called Mr. Twit. Mr. Twit was one of those very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, his eyes, and his nose, were covered in thick hair. The stuff was even sprouting in revolting tuft out of his nostrils and his ear holes. Mr. Twit felt that his hairiness made him look terribly wise and terribly grand. But the truth was he was neither of these things. Mr. Twit was a twit. He was born a twit, and now at the age of 60 he was an even bigger twit than ever. The hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow smooth and matted as it does on most hairy men. It grew in spikes and stuck out straight like bristles of a nail brush. How often did Mr. Twit wash this bristly and nail brush face of his? The answer is never. Not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed it for years. So that was chapter 2. And now we're on to chapter 3, which is the last one we're going to do today. So this one's called Dirty Beers. As you know, an ordinary unhairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy if it's not washed often enough. And there's nothing awful about that. But a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to the hair, especially food. Things like gravy go right in amongst the hair and stay there. You or I can smooth our faces with a flannel, and we will look quickly more or less right again. But a hairy-faced man cannot do that. We can also, if we're careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces, but not so the hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch, and you will notice that even if he opens his mouth very wide, it is impossible for him to get a whole spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into his mouth without leaving some of it on the hairs. Mr. Twit didn't even bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed, there was always hundreds of bits of old breakfast and lunches and suppers sticking to the hairs around his face. They weren't even big bits, mind you, because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand or his sleeve when he was eating. But if you looked closely, not that you'd ever want to, you could see tiny specks of dried up scrambled eggs stuck to the hair, and spinach and tomato ketchup and fish fingers and minced chicken livers and all the other disgusting things that Mr. Twit liked to eat. So if we have a look at the picture up here, look, so this bit here, this says tin sardine. So that's where it is there. This is a piece of cornflake. And this is Stilton cheese. So lots of disgusting things. If you ever looked closer still, hold your noses, ladies and gentlemen. If you peered deep into the moustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you would probably see much larger objects that had escaped the wipe of his hand. Things that had been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty old cheese, or a mouldy old cornflake, or even a slimy tail of a tin sardine. Because of all this, Mr. Twit never really went hungry. By sticking his tongue out and curling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth, he was always able to find a tasty morsel here and there to nibble on. What I'm trying to tell you is that Mr. Twit was a foul, smelly old man. He was an extremely horrid old man, as you will about to find out in a moment. Well, we're not going to find out in a moment. We're going to find out tomorrow. So we have read 3 chapters today, but like I said, they were very short ones. So far, who have we met? Which is the first character we've met? We've met Mr. Twit, haven't we? And you can see by the wonderful descriptions that Roald Dahl has written that he isn't a very nice character. He is a foul and smelly old man. He's an extremely horrid old man, and it also said that Mr. Twit is a twit. Okay, so there are 3 things we know about him. He also doesn't like to wash very much, and he doesn't really care what he looks like. He doesn't take care of his beard, and also he does not very nice things like wipes his mouth with his sleeve, and he, like I said, he doesn't really clean. So I would say that he's maybe a little bit smelly as well. So we've met Mr. Twit, our first character, and actually, although he's not a very nice character, I think that I already quite like his character because he's a really interesting character, that he is old and not very nice, and he's a bit foul. I think he's a really interesting character, so let's see where he goes. I wonder which character we're going to meet tomorrow. So there was 4 main characters in the story. So Mr. Twit we've done, Mrs. Twit, the Roly-Poly Bird, and, well, it's the Mugglewump family. So I wonder who we're going to meet tomorrow. If you want to, you could draw a picture of Mr. Twit, and maybe you could see if you can get it just like this one. You don't have to draw exactly the same. You can obviously do your own one, and obviously this one's in black and white. Maybe you could do yours in colour. Well, good job today, guys, and I hope you enjoyed the first few chapters of the Twits, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow to read the next chapter. Bye.